on the air tonight with late-breaking news on a huge win for the Justice Department, with guilty verdicts for 4 leaders of a far-right group that helped organize and lead the deadly attack on the Capitol. Some now facing decades in prison. Those details in a moment. Plus, a new investigation into the NFL, alleging a ton of workplace discrimination and retaliation. How the league is fighting back against the latest black mark against its company culture. And a new front in the culture wars, the U.S. Navy. Republicans furious that they're using a sailor who is also a drag queen to recruit. But that controversy masks a bigger issue that the Pentagon faces right now. Plus, in tonight's Newsmaker, I'll talk to a writer on strike from one of TV's hottest comedies, why she's on the picket lines, and what she thinks about studios who want to use AI to make your next favorite show. And former First Lady Michelle Obama's new company is leading into the fight against childhood obesity, what it says about the bigger fight to get healthier food to more American kids. That's later in the show. Hi, I'm Garrett, in for Hallie. And just before we came on the air, the U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland applauding the Justice Department after a jury convicted 4 out of 5 members of the far-right Proud Boys of seditious conspiracy. That's in connection with the January 6th attack on the Capitol to keep former President Trump in power after he lost the 2020 election. Take a listen to the Attorney General just a short time ago.
Today's verdict makes clear that the Justice Department will do everything in its power to defend the American people and American democracy.
This jury first came back with a partial verdict for these 4 men who you see on the screen right now, including former Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, finding them guilty on the rare and serious charge of seditious conspiracy. They're now facing possibly decades in prison. Jurors, though, were split on a verdict for the 5th member, Dominic Pizzola, but eventually decided he was not guilty of seditious conspiracy. They couldn't reach a decision on some of the other charges that the 5 men were facing, though, so the judge declared a mistrial on those counts. Prosecutors argued all the way that the Proud Boys were, quote, thirsting for violence on the 6th. You can see members of the group on your screen on that day breaking into the Capitol. These convictions now mark an important milestone for the Justice Department in one of the most serious cases that's come out of the insurrection. The DOJ has now secured seditious conspiracy convictions against the leaders of 2 major extremist groups, the Oath Keepers before this, now the Proud Boys. Ryan Riley covers all of this for us and joins me now. So, Ryan, 4 out of 5 guilty verdicts on seditious conspiracy. That's pretty significant for the Justice Department, but maybe politically significant for former President Trump, too, as he faces some, he's involved in these investigations here with these events dating up to the 6th and before.
That's right, because crucially, one of these defendants who was found guilty of seditious conspiracy, Enrique Tarrio, who's the head of the Proud Boys, was not at the Capitol on January 6th. He was off-site. He was actually at a Baltimore hotel during this attack. So, that definitely has implications for the Jack Smith investigation in terms of him being able to argue and get a guilty plea potentially for someone who wasn't actually at the Capitol on January 6th, but still involved in a conspiracy against that led to the attack on the Capitol. So that's a big win for them. And, I think this the other charge, this 5th defendant who was not found guilty of that seditious conspiracy charge, first of all, we should say that he's found guilty of very significant felonies that are going to expose him to a tremendous amount of prison time, including a conspiracy count, but not that seditious conspiracy charge directly. But, regardless, it also kind of supports overall the jury's verdict here, because it indicates that they looked very clearly at the evidence and followed what the evidence actually showed them, and didn't just, accept everything prosecutors were saying off the bat. They actually looked specifically at things, looked at the evidence, where it can take them, and what verdicts the underlying evidence that prosecutors presented would support, Garrett.
And Ryan, this trial is obviously longer and more complex than a lot of people I know than you anticipated that it would be at the front end. And we've heard from the attorneys for the defendants talking about appeals the whole way through. What happens next year? And how does the fact that we had some of these counts basically thrown out on a mistrial affect the possibility that we've not heard the last of this case?
Yeah, those I think that the counts that there was a mistrial on, honestly, are so, insignificant in terms of the ultimate sentence here that I don't know if the Justice Department will necessarily go to trial again on those individual counts. Because remember, this was a count that took place. This was a trial that took place, way back starting in December, and opening arguments started in January. So we were in a whole different season when this all began. So, I don't know if they're going to want to go back to bat on that again. But, there definitely will be an appeals process here. And I don't know how that's all all going to play out with the sentencing, because this is such a high number of defendants here. You have 5 defendants, and that's a lot of defense lawyers to deal with, and that's why this trial dragged out for so long here, because you had so many arguments from so many different people, everybody getting a shot to question every witness. It just went on and on and on, and finally here we're at the find out stage of the Proud Boys trial.
Interesting stuff. Ryan Riley, who's literally writing the book on this story, thank you for your reporting. And right now, the Biden administration's top immigration official, that's DHS Secretary Mayorkas, is at the southern border just days before lifting of the pandemic-era restrictions that is expected to create a surge of migrants there. Journalists accompanying Mayorkas were taken to the front lines with Border Patrol officers who are encountering, detaining, and sometimes deporting thousands of migrants daily. Border officials have seen a steady increase in migrants trying to cross the border, with more than 200,000 making an attempt in April alone. Experts say that number could more than double once Title 42 goes away next week. Now, the Biden administration has made this coming surge a big focus in recent weeks, striking a deal with Mexico to return migrants there and sending 1,500 troops to the border to help impose stricter penalties for illegal crossings, all that among other moves. Now, NBC's Gabe Gutierrez was in El Paso last night. He has crossed the border into Juarez, Mexico for us today. And Gabe, you're in a place where you've got thousands of would-be migrants headed north, planning their next steps. What does Title 42 mean for these folks and their plans to get into the U.S. potentially next week?
Hi there, Garrett. Well, as you can see behind me, there is a tent camp that has been set up here, just steps from the U.S.-Mexico border, just steps from El Paso. And I can tell you some news just in the last few hours that officials in El Paso have actually put a number on how many migrants they believe are here, potentially waiting to get into the city once Title 42 lifts. The mayor of El Paso estimates at least 10,000 migrants will cross or might cross into Texas again when Title 42 lifts next week. And the city of El Paso is now planning to house families in 2 vacant middle schools. You recall yesterday we were in surrounding, we saw the large groups of migrants that were surrounding that church right there in El Paso. Well, now the city says that they will be overwhelmed, that they have been overwhelmed over the last several weeks. And in addition to declaring a state of emergency earlier this week, here we are. So we have been speaking with migrants here in Juarez really throughout the day. Some of them are familiar with Title 42. Some of them are not. We spoke with one man from Guatemala who had a 2-year-old son. He was actually planning on making the trip over potentially as early as today because of a variety of reasons, but he just wanted to cross into the U.S. And a lot of these migrants have been fed misinformation on what will happen once they get there. We did speak with a volunteer who was handing out humanitarian supplies to these migrants. It's a desperate situation here for them. Take a listen to what she had to say briefly.
It's a heartbreaking thing, seeing all these people. We wish we could do more for them. And we see a lot, different people all the time. People comes and go.
And so, Garrett, this is just one of the tent camps that has sprung up in Juarez. It is just across the street from that migrant detention facility that caught fire in March, killing 40 people. Another haunting reminder of just how dangerous this humanitarian crisis at the border can be, Garrett.
There's real human cost to all of it. And Gabe, there's also this political element to this, obviously. I mean, the fact that the DHS secretary is down there on a very public trip. Why has the Biden administration gone to such lengths to show face on this issue right now?
Well, they really have no choice at this point, Garrett. The pressure is mounting. Even they've been getting criticism in the last few days from Democrats. Ruben Gallego, the congressman who's now running for Senator Sinema's seat, he's also blasting the Biden administration, saying that, you know, they just have not given border states enough information here. Senator Bob Menendez also coming out saying that the deployment of troops to the border is unacceptable. And, of course, New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been very vocal, calling the Biden administration irresponsible for letting it get to this point. He, of course, is dealing with those buses that are coming to his city. So the Biden administration getting it from all sides, not just Republicans, but a lot of Democrats at this point, Garrett.
No, that's a good point. And Republicans are rolling out their border bill next week, so the president's going to get squeezed even more. Gabe Gutierrez doing great work down in Mexico. Gabe, thank you. There's new legal trouble tonight for the NFL, with attorneys general in both New York and California accusing the world's most popular sports league of violating pay equity and anti-discrimination laws. The New York AG, Letitia James, says she will ensure that the NFL is held accountable, while California AG Rob Bonta is following up, saying no company is too big or too popular to avoid being held responsible for its actions. Both of them cite a 2022 New York Times report with more than 30 female ex-employees of the NFL who say they faced gender discrimination and retaliation after filing complaints to the league's HR team. The league calls these allegations entirely inconsistent with its values and practices, insisting it does not tolerate any form of discrimination. Kathy Park is following this story for us from L.A. So, Kathy, walk us through these allegations that the Times surfaced and that these AGs are taking into the end zone here.
Yeah, so Garrett, let me start there with the New York Times article from last year. It basically put a spotlight on the NFL and a toxic work culture. More than 30 former employees, all women, went on the record, and there were claims of everything from harassment, discrimination, ageism, and sexism. The list goes on and on. In fact, there was one case where a woman said that during the Super Bowl, a senior executive pushed her, and that executive, there was no sort of repercussion after that, and held on to his job. There was another issue you might remember in 2014, the Ray Rice scandal, which was a big shakeup there. And then, of course, there were other issues of people speaking out, and they were saying if they reported this to the HR division with the NFL, there were cases of retaliation. So ultimately, the AGs in New York and California will be launching this probe to see if any sort of federal and state employee discrimination laws were broken. So they'll be looking at all of these allegations from the past, and then, you know, from the more recent cases that came to light, and of course looking at the New York Times article as well as a reference point as they move forward with this probe.
You know, the NFL has been really reticent to air their dirty laundry in public, but you read that statement that we showed some of earlier in the segment, and it does sound like they plan to cooperate here. What's your reporting bear out?
Yeah, so Garrett, the NFL came out with a statement earlier today saying that they do plan on fully cooperating with this investigation. And when you dive a little bit deeper into that statement, they're saying that even last year there was a similar inquiry launched by other AGs across the country. And the statement that they released today says, in part, we outlined many of the policies, practices, education programs, and partnerships we've implemented to act on this commitment, and invite the state attorneys general to meet and discuss our efforts in these areas. We received no further communication from any of the attorneys general before today's announcement. And Garrett, we should note that this probe is at the corporate level. No teams or players were singled out.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, obviously, we've had teams. I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., where the Commanders have been right in the middle of it. How does this fit into those other investigations? I mean, do we see a scenario in which all these, investigations get sort of mixed into one big pot here?
Yeah, I mean, if you follow the NFL, watch the NFL, this headline isn't new, right? It's been something that we've been tracking for several years now. I mentioned the Ray Rice scandal in 2014. The league, shortly after that, said, look, we're going to make some changes. We're going to put some protocols in place. But a lot of these former employees are saying that these changes ultimately fell short. So we will see if this probe does anything. Obviously, it's still kind of in the early stages, and the subpoenas have been issued to the NFL.
Very good. Well, Kathy Park, thanks for being on top of it for us. And tonight, the man suspected of opening fire in a medical facility, killing one woman, and sending Atlanta into a complete lockdown the other day is behind bars. He faces murder and aggravated assault charges after passing up his first court appearance just in the last couple of hours. You can see here the moment that police closed in on him, ending a half-day manhunt that spread from Atlanta City out into the suburbs and ended about 10 miles away from the Braves Stadium. Now, we're learning today that the 24-year-old served in the Coast Guard. He was discharged from that service earlier this year. He used a handgun in this attack, and that he was with his mom at this medical facility for some kind of appointment. We're also learning the name of the woman who was killed, 39-year-old Amy St. Pierre. She worked at the CDC, that agency tweeting out that their hearts are with her family, friends, and colleagues as they grieve this tragic loss. Blaine Alexander's covering this for us in Atlanta tonight. And Blaine, police still aren't saying a motive if they know one, but you're speaking with one of the people who helped track this suspect down. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Garrett, you know, when you hear the details of how officers were able to ultimately take this guy into custody, it really is pretty remarkable, especially when you consider that Atlanta is a very sprawling area. He could have gone in any direction. So officers say that first they were able to use kind of a system of license plate readers that were able to whittle his location down to Cobb County near that stadium. And that is where Christy Caldwell comes into play. I talked to her in her neighborhood today, and she actually showed me the area where he was apprehended. And she says that there were only a few officers in her complex at the time, but she, as she describes to me, says she just had a gut feeling that he could be hiding out somewhere near the pool. Take a look at what she said.
I was like, wow. I mean, I can't believe my thought, you know, my hunch would lead to them finding, you know, somebody. But, you know, why not the perfect place, you know, to hide?
So, Garrett, she says what happens is that she saw an officer. She went up to him and said, hey, you know what? You guys should check down by the pool area. There's a pool house. There's a gazebo. There are plenty of hiding spaces. The officer thanked her, she says, and she said about 30 seconds later, she saw police cars, dozens of them, streaming by her, basically telling her to get on the ground, and said that that is when he was apprehended. She says because of that tip she gave them, Garrett.
We need to get this woman into like an honorary deputy program or something. I mean, that's some pretty good police work. We should not discount the 4 women who are also hurt in this shooting. We've learned their names now. Lisa Glenn, Georgette Whitlow, Jasmine Daniel, and Alessia Hollinger. Are we getting any kind of update on their conditions from the hospital?
Their conditions are serious, Garrett. 3 of those people are still in the ICU. 2 of them are still in critical condition. I think something that really stuck with me was hearing the head there at Grady essentially talk about the fact that they have a long way to go. You know, I think often when we think of these shootings, we certainly think about survivors, but they've got some long-term scars that they're going to have to deal with both physically and emotionally. Here's a little bit of their update. Take a look.
Unfortunately, this day and age, seeing shooting victims is almost a daily occurrence here.
And so we hear that. We know that there are 4 women who are still, quite frankly, fighting for their lives. And then, of course, the woman who lost her life, Amy St. Pierre. We understand that she is a wife. She is a middle sister flanked by 2 brothers. And she's a mother of 2 young children. So just really an unspeakable tragedy in all of this, Garrett.
It truly is. Blaine Alexander, thank you for your reporting. And the calls for justice and criminal charges are getting louder tonight after the New York City medical examiner ruled a homeless man's death on the subway a homicide. The cause of death was the compression of the neck, a chokehold. Mayor Eric Adams today called it a symptom of the mental health crisis in that city.
We cannot have people with severe emotional illnesses on our subway system. You can't have people on the system that need care and ignore them. Others decided to ignore them. I said no to that.
Witnesses say Jordan Neely entered a train car on Monday afternoon and started yelling at passengers, asking them for food, then saying he wanted to hurt someone and that he didn't care if he went to jail. That was before a bystander then put him in a chokehold and took him to the ground. We're going to show you that moment, but just once, and a warning, it is disturbing. Now, on the video, you can see Neely on the ground being restrained in that chokehold with other people help holding him down as well. We're told he was held in that position for 15 minutes before the NYPD arrived and began treatment. The 24-year-old man, who some reports say is a former Marine, was then questioned by police but was released without charges. NBC's Rahema Ellis is covering all this for us. Now, Rahema, now that this has been declared a homicide, what does that mean for the potential next steps in the investigation, any possible criminal case?
Well, it means that for some people, it means they would like an explanation from the NYPD as to why this person was not arrested in the first place. But
Sure.
They are speaking to the fact that they got something from the medical examiner's office that made their actions now moved into the district attorney's. Take a look at this full screen that we have from the police department. It's kind of in police speak, but the interpretation basically is that they are now saying to the district attorney that they would like them to now take a closer look at this case, now that the medical examiner's office has deemed this as a homicide. But you should also look at the statement from the medical examiner in explanation of the determination of homicide, and it is also in full screen. It says, this is not a ruling on intent or culpability, which is for the district attorney and for criminal justice system to consider. So the medical examiner is saying, we are not determining if this was intentional that this chokehold led to this man's death. They are saying it's up to the district attorney. The police department is agreeing with that. The police department is also, Garrett, now asked for anyone who is a witness, who has pictures, who has video, to come forward and share that information with the department. Garrett?
And Rahema, while this investigation is going on, there's already been a ton of political back and forth here. We played some of the mayor's comments, but he also had a statement overnight saying that there's a lot we don't know about what happened, but then added that there were serious mental health issues at play here. You had Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez kind of clapping back to those comments, calling them a new low for, in her words, not being able to clearly condemn a public murder. I understand the governor has had to do some cleanup talking about this issue, too.
Yeah, the governor was asked a lot of questions because some people thought that her comment on this was not appropriate, quite honestly. Take a full screen look at what her comment was as I read it to you. As she said, this was yesterday before this declaration of a homicide was determined. She said, one element we have not talked about is the $1 billion we have invested in mental health services, so we don't have people who are homeless on our subways, many of them in the throes of a mental health episode. And that's what I believe are some of the factors involved here. So there's consequences for behavior. That was before we got the determination from the medical examiner's offices about them declaring this a homicide. Listen to what the governor said today.
I'm really pleased that the district attorney is looking into this matter. As I said, there have to be consequences. And so we'll see how this unfolds. But his family deserves justice. Just looking at that video, you know it's wrong. No one has the right to take the life of another person.
And so we're at the very beginning, Garrett, of this investigation, which is going to be lengthy. The mayor insists it's going to be thorough. He has been saying that there are several layers to what happened here. He wants the investigation to pull back each one of those layers before any determination is made. He's asking for people to be conscientious and calm about allowing the process to take its course. Garrett?
The single most scrutinized DA's office in the country, probably going to be even more so with all this going on now. Rahema Ellis in New York City for us tonight. Thank you. And a tough day on Wall Street, driven by a massive slide for regional banks that could impact your money as fears of a broader crisis grow after 3 of the largest bank collapses now in U.S. history. You see all the red on the board there, the Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ, all down. The Dow negative now for the year. One bank getting absolutely slammed is PacWest. We started talking about this last night. You see it's down more than 50% from just yesterday, 86% from where it started the year. The leadership of that bank saying they're pursuing, quote, all options. And it's not the only one, by the way. Tennessee-based First Horizon is tumbling today after its merger with TD Bank fell through. Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver joins me now. And Caleb, what do these Wall Street struggles of these regional banks mean for my money, even if I keep it somewhere else? Like, is there a sign that these collapses we've seen are going to have a bigger impact on the broader economy than people were hoping?
Yeah, what we're seeing is what we call contagion, because these banks are in relatively decent shape. A lot of these regional banks, PacWest has been around since 1999, does a lot of lending in California to small businesses, to families, even to bigger corporations. But investors, and this is on the equity side, investors are looking at these banks wondering how healthy they are given their balance sheets. So if we see more banks like this have these big sell-offs, or if we see more bank takeovers or failures like we saw earlier in the week with First Republic now being owned by JP Morgan, it could spread to other banks, and that could cause what we call a tightening of liquidity, where banks don't want to lend money to one another, they don't want to lend money to consumers, they don't want to lend money to businesses, and people don't want to borrow, and that could cause a much bigger problem and potentially drive us into a recession if we're not headed towards one already.
Yeah, it feels like you stack that up with the interest rates that have been going up, the Fed's tightening too. You get a compounding problem there. Our friends up the block at CNBC are reporting what one analyst at a more stable bank, the Swiss-based UBS, is saying, suggesting that it might be time for bigger banks to start picking off some of these regional banks. I mean, I'm old enough to remember too big to fail. What does it mean for consumers if we start seeing even more bank consolidation once again, with the big getting bigger and the small getting wiped out?
Yeah, we've already seen it this week with J.P. Morgan Chase, the biggest bank in North America, in this country, now acquiring First Republic Bank. It has the money, it has the assets, and these bigger banks have the reserves to backstop any big pull from investors on their deposits. So you could see bigger banks get bigger. The problem is these regional banks are very important to their regions, especially to their communities. Again, a lot of small businesses borrow from them. A lot of families take their mortgage from these regional banks. A lot of these credit unions also do a lot of lending. So you don't want to see these little regional banks go out of business or get acquired necessarily, because you need that local touch in those relationships. If we see a lot more of this, we're going to end up with a bunch of behemoth banks and no local touch necessarily in the communities where they operate.
Yeah, it's just a little community bank unless it's your bank. Caleb Silver, thank you for your analysis on this. And we've got some breaking news here in just the last few minutes. Lawyers for E. Jean Carroll, who you'll remember is suing former President Trump for battery and for defamation stemming from an alleged rape, are resting their case in that civil trial. The 7 days of hearings saw Carroll testify that she was attacked by Mr. Trump in a New York department store back in the mid-90s. The former president, for his part, didn't attend any part of the trial, but the judge is giving him until this Sunday to change his mind and step up to testify. Closing arguments are expected to start on Monday. And coming up, a new report says Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas did not disclose tuition payments for a relative that came from a GOP megadonor. That's in our 5 things. Plus, singer Ed Sheeran celebrating a court win today, what his victory means for musicians. Next. One person is still missing after a chemical explosion in Massachusetts. More on that in our 5 things. But first, Ed Sheeran today celebrating a jury's decision to protect what he calls the creative process of songwriters after the pop star was found not liable in a copyright infringement lawsuit. Listen to him outside the court after the decision.
It's devastating to be accused of stealing someone else's song when we've put so much work into our livelihoods. I'm just a guy with a guitar who loves writing music for people to enjoy. I am not and will never allow myself to be a piggy bank for anyone to shake.
The trial, stemming from a lawsuit from the heirs of Ed Townsend, who co-wrote Let's Get It On with Marvin Gaye, they claim Sheeran copied Townsend's work when he wrote his hit song Thinking Out Loud. Listen for yourself.
23, I'm thinking about how. And if you feel like I feel, baby, then come on.
I don't know. In a statement, the attorney representing the Townsend family said they respect the jury's decision, but they will be appealing the verdict. I want to bring in attorney and legal analyst Angela Senadella now. And Angela, is this the outcome you expected from this trial? Where do you think Townsend's case fell through?
Yes, this was what I expected, although with juries, you never know, especially with musical copyright trials. But where I think he fell short and where Sheeran won was really at this emotional level. So like all lawsuits, this trial was fought at a technical level and an emotional level. And I noticed there that you played both snippets of the song. But at a technical level, this entire trial just came down to the sheet music, what was written on the sheet music. And you had musicologists testifying of whether or not these were similar or different chord progressions. But at an emotional level, you had Sheeran on the stand, this likable, charismatic musician who with such integrity and conviction said he would never steal another musician's music and was really trying to fight on behalf of songwriters everywhere. He went so far as to say he would never pick up a guitar again if he lost this lawsuit. So I think he won emotionally.
And that can be compelling. During the testimony, Sheeran talked about how this case was a threat to musicians who create their own music. Obviously, we've seen trials like this before. We will see them again. I mean, there were stars like Taylor Swift, Led Zeppelin, Vanilla Ice. This won't be the last time we see a case like this, surely. I mean, does this verdict today mean anything for the music industry more broadly? Does it kind of brush back future lawsuits like this?
Garrett, you brought up all the right points. So on one hand, yes, this is significant for songwriters. They can take this breath of relief and know that if they have integrity and conviction over a chord progression, they may not. I mean, they may actually win their lawsuit. But on the other hand, all these lawsuits are brought all the time. And we saw Ed Sheeran with such emotion say that this was taxing on him. The litigation was expensive, was long, took up so much energy. So I like to think of it as how this is both the upside and the downside of living in America. anyone can bring a lawsuit, which also means anyone can bring a lawsuit.
And Ed Sheeran can write a song about it now and make millions of dollars off his experience. A win-win.
There you go.
Angela, thank you for breaking this down. I want to get you now to the 5 things that our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, there's a new report that says Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas failed to disclose still more gifts from wealthy Republican donor Harlan Crow. This is according to an investigation by ProPublica that says Crow paid thousands of dollars in private school tuition for Thomas's grandnephew, potentially up to $150,000. This is the latest in a series of reports detailing previously unknown financial ties between the two men. NBC hasn't independently verified this reporting. Thomas declined to comment to ProPublica, and he hasn't responded to NBC. Crow's office released a statement that didn't deny the story, but just said he's, quote, long been passionate about giving back to those less fortunate, especially at-risk youth. Number 2, 1 worker is missing and 4 people are hurt after a chemical explosion at a Massachusetts industrial park. Fire officials say an industrial-sized vat from inside the building had been thrown about 30 feet by the explosion. Officials are still trying to figure out exactly what happened here. Number 3, law enforcement today captured the last of 4 inmates who escaped from a Mississippi jail almost 2 weeks ago. This man was found in a home about 20 miles from the jail. Officials say he was arrested with a female acquaintance who is facing charges connected to the escape. Number 4, the Florida legislature passed a bill banning transgender people from using public restrooms that align with their gender identity. The Safety in Public Spaces Act makes that a second-degree misdemeanor now. State Republicans also passed a bill banning diversity programs in colleges. Number 5, and in honor of Star Wars Day, May the 4th be with you, the late Carrie Fisher got her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame today. Known for her portrayal of Princess Leia in the original Star Wars trilogy and in the sequel we won't discuss on this broadcast, Fisher died in 2016. Her star is right near her fellow Star Wars alumni Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill, as it should be. Now, today, several Republican senators are asking for answers from the Navy on a digital ambassadorship program involving a drag queen to help recruitment. Their letter cites concerns of the, quote, promotion of a banned app, referring to TikTok, and behavior they say many deem inappropriate in a professional workplace. This is all centered around Navy sailor Joshua Kelly, who performs in drag and goes by the stage name Harpy Daniels. Daniels was selected as one of the Navy's digital ambassadors back in November of last year, according to this TikTok post on Daniels' account that you're seeing on your screen. A Navy spokesperson said the program was designed to explore the digital environment to reach a wide range of potential candidates as the Navy navigates the most challenging recruiting environment it's faced. They added that the program has ended and they're evaluating how it will exist in the future. I want to bring in Aaron Gilchrist now, who's been digging into this story for us. And Aaron, we now have these Republican senators coming at the Navy for this recruitment tactic. Drag's obviously been a super hot button issue culturally lately. Break this down for us.
So back up a little bit here. I mean, obviously, like we heard, the Navy is dealing with what it says is its greatest recruitment challenge in the history of the volunteer Navy. A big statement to make. And the reality is that all of our armed forces are dealing with recruitment challenges in the last several years. In particular, we looked at a survey, and we'll put it up on the screen here, that asked people, how willing are you to join the U.S. military? They looked at that age group where they typically pull recruits from, and only 13% said that they were willing to join the military. That's an issue for them. So the Navy, in this case, stood up this digital ambassador program last October to sort of to test out one way to reach people where they are in the social media spaces. That's the world we live in right now. You have these influencers out there, and everybody wants to get to them to get to potential recruits or customers, whatever the case may be. Joshua Kelly it was one of the 5 Navy digital ambassadors. Joshua is a sailor, obviously, and also a drag queen, as you mentioned. Harpy Daniels is the name there. So Kelly has been using TikTok and Instagram to share about the Navy experience and also to share some of these drag performances. And we heard from this group of senators, 14 of them who signed on to this letter, saying that the Navy should not be promoting the use of a banned app, TikTok in this case, on personal devices of service members. We know they're banned on the devices on government devices. But they went on to ask, and we put it up on the screen here, they went on to ask these questions. Does the Navy endorse drag shows? Would the Navy enlist burlesque or exotic dancers to reach possible recruits. Part of the letter they sent to the Secretary of the Navy earlier this week, these senators are saying it's not appropriate for the U.S. military to engage in that sort of activity, and they've asked several other questions they want the Secretary to answer. We did reach out to the Navy to see if there was any response to that letter. No response just yet about that.
Covering this issue politically, the TikTok part of it seems almost like a pretext to get into the cultural war part of it. From my perspective, having covered this on the Hill, is this recruiting strategy kind of wildly out of the norm for the Navy? I mean, obviously, they've got to address modern problems need modern solutions.
Right, and that's something we've seen all branches of the military do. They sort of look at where the world is now, whenever now is, and figure out how do we reach people in those spaces. The traditional methods have been, setting up recruitment centers and going into high school settings. And in this case, they're now saying, you know what? Social media is where people are every day, all day long. And so the Navy wanted to test out this program to see how it would work. And at this point, we know that the Navy has said that it's looking at whatever data it was able to pull from this experience from October to March, October of last year to March of this year. And we'll wait to see what, if anything, says that they should try it again or they should not try it again. And I think some of the backlash that we're seeing in, particularly in conservative social media spaces, are going to be influencing or impacting potentially how the Navy decides to move forward with this or not.
I'm sure it will, but if nothing else, we're talking about the Navy right now.
And that can't be bad for recruitment, right?
It can't hurt, right?
The word out there.
Aaron Gilchrist, thank you for your reporting on this. And when we come back, our newsmaker tonight is someone on the front lines of the Hollywood writers' strike, how it's affecting them next. Well, somebody left a big mess in the woods in a town in New Jersey, and we'll let this noodle mystery simmer for a bit before we come back to it. But first, we want to bring you tonight's Newsmaker, where we go one-on-one with the people making headlines on issues we're all talking about. Today, the White House announcing new actions to make sure artificial intelligence is used responsibly in this country. AI is also a huge concern for thousands of writers in the Writers Guild of America who are striking this week, putting a halt to many major TV and film productions. Some of the things they're asking major studios for include regulating the use of AI, as well as an increase in minimum pay and standardizing residuals for both streaming and original television programs. The studios say they're willing to keep talking as the writers try to, quote, break this logjam. We should mention at this point that Comcast, the corporation that owns our parent company, NBC Universal, is one of those major studios. Joining us now is a writer for ABC's Emmy Award, we wish it was an NBC program, ABC's Emmy Award-winning series Abbott Elementary, and the Writers Guild of America West captain, Brittany Nichols. So, Brittany, thank you for being with us tonight. And just starting off, I mean, I remember the last WGA strike. It was 15 years ago, obviously eventually got resolved. Talk about what's changed in your business from then till now that led to this breaking point.
So one of the things that's changed is streaming. Right now, about half of television writers work in streaming, and our pay has not changed to reflect those changes. Another thing is a third of us used to work at our minimum, and now about half of us are working at the minimum. It's really become a situation where our minimum pay has become the ceiling.
That's interesting. How does it... What's the function of that? I mean, is that a function of streaming? I mean, how do you get locked into a situation where the minimum becomes the standard?
It is the studios. They sort of have just drawn a line in the sand to say that we're on a mission to devalue the work of writing, and it has resulted in a situation where a lot of us are having trouble building a career. We live in Los Angeles and New York, both very expensive cities, and seeing this decrease in our wages, which has been 23% over the past 10 years when you adjust for inflation, it's really taken a toll on our livelihoods.
I mean, that decrease over time takes a toll, but obviously, you know, the strike itself takes a toll, too. I mean, talk to me about what this is like for you and for other writers on a personal level. I mean, you're not going to work every day. You're having to come on a program like this and fight just to go back to work and get fair pay.
Yeah, I was a writer for Abbott Elementary, as you mentioned, and we were supposed to return to the room and start working on season 3 this week. So instead of doing that, we're out walking the picket lines, trying to get a fair deal. And I know from the resolve that I'm seeing from my fellow writers and from the solidarity that we're seeing from the other entertainment unions that we're not going to stop until we get a fair deal.
When you talk about that solidarity, and I think if we're going to kind of just be real with this, I think a lot of the the points where people intersect with this is they see the celebrities that they follow on their Instagram or whatever standing with writers here. Most recently, Drew Barrymore stepped down from hosting the MTV Movie and TV Awards in solidarity with the writers. She said, in part, everything we celebrate and honor about movies and television is born out of their creation. How important is that kind of solidarity across creative fields to making this matter to people and to potentially restarting negotiations?
It's incredible. I don't think that has been the tone or the tenor of the entertainment industry previous to this moment. And it is a sign that things are broken with writers and with other people that are involved in entertainment. The studios have really clamped down on all of the workers in our industry, and we're just the first to the battlefield.
Talk to me about the AI piece of this, because it is interesting, right? I mean, it seems like a theoretical concern now, but the next time a contract comes up, it might not be. The idea that AI could be attempting to do the work that you all do so well.
Yeah, so we are often caught in the position of protecting ourselves against what's happening currently and looking towards the future. We know that this is something that we should be concerned about, because if you look at how the studios reacted to us bringing it up, they didn't want to talk about it. In fact, they offered us having one meeting a year to discuss the advances that have happened in technology. That's someone that I think might be planning to use technology down the line. So I think that's us just being sort of ahead of the curve a little bit and wanting to protect ourselves before it's too late.
Yeah, as fast as this sort of thing is going, a year from now, it feels like a lot could be changing by then. Brittany Nichols, thank you for coming on and talking about this with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You bet. And coming up, why the drug maker behind some of those super popular weight loss drugs says it's cutting some supply in the U.S. Plus, the terrifying moments a man saves a baby in a stroller, rolling right into traffic. That's later in The Local. Novo Nordisk, the company that makes that really popular weight loss drug Wegovy we've been talking about, is saying today that it's going to temporarily cut some of the U.S. supply of the drug to help keep up with soaring demand. The CFO telling CNBC this is about safeguarding continuity of care for patients. There has been a gigantic surge in demand for drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic recently. Nearly 5 million people were prescribed drugs in that same class as Ozempic in February of this year alone. That's 3 million more than were prescribed them just 2 years ago. And the demand clearly isn't going to slow down anytime soon. Just yesterday, we told you about states that are having to crack down on pharmacies producing copycat versions of these same drugs. And Barclays says the obesity drug industry could be worth as much as $200 billion in the next decade. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joins me now. And Doc, demand is surging here. Clearly, the company's scrambling to keep up. But now they're cutting specifically starter dose supplies. What does that mean for the people with diabetes who were actually supposed to be the people taking this medication in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Garrett, you know, as you mentioned in the lead, we have been dealing with these shortages of both Ozempic and Wegovy for some time now. It's really, a mismatch of supply and demand. And just so that our viewers are reminded again that Ozempic and Wegovy are the same medication, semaglutide. Ozempic is indicated only for type 2 diabetes, and Wegovy is specifically for overweight or obesity. And the issue really comes down to, again, that there's been such an increased demand for these medications that what Novo Nordisk is really saying is, listen, we have to cut down on the supply of these starter doses so that the individuals who are taking it can continue to take it consistently, because you don't want to have treatment like this interrupted.
So does it fall to doctors then to be kind of the triage here on the front lines, determining who's a candidate for starting these drugs because they need it for their diabetes control or because they want it for weight loss?
Well, again, there are very strict indications, Garrett, for what these drugs are and who they are indicated for. Ozempic, as I mentioned, is for type 2 diabetes. For Wegovy, you are a candidate for the medicine if you are obese or if you are overweight and have other conditions, comorbidities that would place you at an increased risk for cardiovascular disease, such as hypertension, high cholesterol, or type 2 diabetes. And those are very strict criteria. We know that people are taking it to lose 5 or 10 pounds who are not necessarily overweight and who don't have those underlying risk factors for cardiovascular disease. That is not who these medications were ever intended for.
It's interesting, but it does feel like such a wide universe of people, and there you have the problem with supply versus demand. Dr. Azar, we could probably talk about this all day. These drugs are fascinating to us, but thank you for your analysis on this.
You bet.
NBC covers hundreds of stories each day because you couldn't possibly read, watch, or listen to all of them. Thankfully, we have our bureau teams, and they've done it for you. This is what they tell us is going on in their regions in a segment we like to call The Local. Starting with our Western Bureau tonight, look at this terrifying moment caught on camera. That's a stroller which started rolling down a high desert driveway and towards what looks like a very busy road. The baby boy's great aunt there tried to run after it but fell. And you see that man nearby noticed what was happening, ran to catch up with the stroller. He told our Los Angeles affiliate after the whole thing he was thankful that he got there. Yeah, we are too. And also out of our Western Bureau, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's a fish with fangs. Fun. That's right. These fanged fish are called lancet fish, and they're mysteriously washing up on beaches in Oregon. Biologists don't exactly know why. They're actually deep-sea fish normally, but they occasionally pop up. And they're cannibals too, by the way, so maybe they ought to just stay down there. And from our Northeast Bureau, people noodling on a mystery. Why? I love these pictures. Why in the world hundreds of pounds of pasta were dumped next to a New Jersey stream? Folks, no Alfredo, no marinara, nothing, just piles of plain pasta. Neighbors told our New York station that the pasta most likely came from a nearby home up for sale. What it was doing there, I couldn't say. The city council candidate who reported it said the whole thing has been cleaned up. We're thankful for that. This is still to come. Michelle Obama is building on her White House initiative with a new company. How she's fighting to get kids to eat better. That's next. Michelle Obama today announcing that she's co-founded a company making healthier food and drinks for kids, products that she says have less sugar and higher nutritional value.
I've learned that on this issue, if you want to change the game, you can't just work from the outside. You got to get inside. You've got to find ways to change the food and beverage industry itself.
The former First Lady's work with a company called Plessy Nutrition is an extension of her initiative to help improve child nutrition while she was in the White House. Childhood obesity is unfortunately still quite prevalent in the U.S., affecting about 20% of all kids between the ages of 2 and 19, according to the CDC. Sugary drinks are children's main source of added sugar, Obama said, as 2/3 of them have at least one every day. This new company will also contribute 10% of its profits to causes working to improve child nutrition. Dr. Kavita Patel joins me now on this. So, Dr. Patel, we're still seeing such concerning numbers when it comes to childhood obesity, and a lot of that problem has to do not with the products, but with access. I mean, what's it going to take to really expand access to healthier foods for American kids?
Yeah, Garrett, you saw this start with the First Lady trying to emphasize, as you pointed out, her Let's Move initiative with physical activity, but it's going to take a combination of making access to healthy and affordable foods incredibly easy. That means meeting people where they are. So getting kind of food distribution at schools, in hospitals, in clinics, in churches. And then the transportation gaps. Many places in the country have these food deserts. You can't find healthy grocery stores or anything locally. So we need to solve that problem. And then finally, public and private partnerships. You know, no one entity can do it alone. And so you have to create both economic incentives and then also just community-driven incentives to kind of cross these barriers. But, you know, it's going to be a tough battle.
Right. I mean, the thing I want to know about this product is if it's only being sold in like Whole Foods, you're missing a huge portion of the country that needs this kind of thing. Michelle Obama's also pointing out, though, that kids are still eating way too much added sugar. That's the main thing here, what she's trying to tackle. Are there other things that you would recommend parents like me really steer clear of with their kids?
Yeah, Garrett, I'm living and breathing this too. And what was disturbing is the First Lady highlighting that kids on average, United States kids get an average of 53 pounds of excess sugar than they need. Think about how much kids weigh. That's incredible. So a couple of things I try to do myself to model this behavior for patients. Number one, try to also limit highly processed foods. Garrett, if you look on the back of a package and you do not recognize those ingredients, it is probably not something you should give your children. And then also think about having a replacement and swaps that are easy. Just switching someone off of soda doesn't work well. So do kind of smaller swaps and smaller quantities so that you can put in those good habits for success.
These are good tips, Dr. Kavita Patel. Thank you. And that's a wrap for this hour. Coverage picks up right now. And we're coming on the air tonight with late-breaking news on a huge win for the Justice Department, with guilty verdicts for 4 leaders of a far-right group that helped organize and lead the deadly attack on the Capitol. Some now facing decades in prison. The details in just a moment. We're also live at the U.S.-Mexico border, hearing from people who hope to seek asylum just as a key immigration policy is set to expire. How it's lining up with a crucial visit from the Homeland Security Secretary. Plus, demands for justice after a person killed a homeless man in broad daylight on the New York City subway, didn't even get arrested. The medical examiner just ruled it a homicide, the reaction on the ground, and all the political back and forth. And a new investigation into the NFL, alleging a ton of workplace discrimination and retaliation. How the league is fighting back against the latest black mark against its company culture. And Ed Sheeran, not just thinking out loud, he's speaking out loud and proud after a courtroom victory today. Why a jury ruled he did not copy one of Marvin Gaye's most famous songs. That's later in the show. And hi, I'm Garrett, in for Hallie. And tonight, the U.S. Attorney General says the jury's decision to convict 4 out of 5 members of the far-right Proud Boys of seditious conspiracy shows the central role the men played on the January 6th insurrection on the Capitol, and applauded the DOJ for this major win. Listen.
Today's verdict makes clear that the Justice Department will do everything in its power to defend the American people and American democracy.
Now, the jury first came back with a partial verdict for these 4 men who you see on your screen right now, including former Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, finding them guilty on the rare and serious charge of seditious conspiracy. They are now facing possibly decades in prison. Jurors were split on a verdict for the 5th member, Dominic Pizzola, but eventually decided he was not guilty of seditious conspiracy. They also couldn't reach a decision on some of the other charges the 5 men were facing, so the judge declared a mistrial on those counts. Pizzola's attorney telling reporters earlier that his focus was separating his client from that seditious conspiracy charge.
I did what I had to do for Mr. Pizzola and to separate him as much as I possibly can from this theory, and that's what I did.
And prosecutors argued that the Proud Boys were, quote, thirsting for violence on the 6th. You see members of the group here on your screen on that day breaking into the U.S. Capitol. The convictions marked an important milestone for the Justice Department in one of the most serious cases that's come out of the insurrection attempt. The DOJ has now secured seditious conspiracy convictions against the leaders of 2 major extremist groups, first the Oath Keepers and now the Proud Boys. Ryan Riley covers all of this for us, and he joins me now. So, Ryan, 4 out of 5 guilty verdicts on seditious conspiracy. That's pretty significant for the Justice Department, but also politically for the former president. He faces legal issues, investigations in connection with these events, too. How are these things connected?
Yeah, you know, it's really huge for DOJ securing these seditious conspiracy verdicts, especially against Enrique Tarrio. So Enrique Tarrio was actually arrested a couple of days before the January 6th attack. He was arrested in connection with a previous incident in which the Proud Boys had been in the Capitol after one of these events. They were in D.C. in November and December of 2020. He actually ended up getting sentenced in connection with one of these incidents, but he was arrested for that incident just before January 6th, and that sort of took him off the streets, essentially. The FBI basically took the strategy of targeting people who they thought were sort of leaders or extremists and were sort of trying to pick them off or discourage them from coming to D.C. on January 6th. And they did that by arresting Enrique Tarrio. What that meant is that on January 6th itself, Enrique Tarrio was at a hotel in Baltimore. He had just been released and was told to get out of the city by a local judge here. So he was in this hotel room in Baltimore for this attack. And the significance of that is that you have a situation where now there is a guilty verdict being found by a jury for someone who wasn't actually present for the January 6th attack itself, which, extend the metaphor here, right? Someone who is in a Baltimore hotel, you could also bring that charge against someone who is perhaps at 1600 Pennsylvania and succeed ultimately on a conspiracy charge like this, Garrett.
Yeah, that's a very interesting connection. Now, Ryan, how close do we think to the end of this case? I mean, the real end, right? Your attorneys are often talking about appealing in this situation. What's going to happen on appeals and the mistrial element of this, where you see the government go after these guys again on some of those counts that were thrown out?
You know, I think they might hold those in their back pocket for a little bit, those mistrial counts, but they're so insignificant to the larger story here that I don't think that, that's really necessarily going to hold up. We're definitely going to see some appeals, but that's going to take a while. I mean, these guys are going to be locked up for, a long time just awaiting, their sentencing and all of these appeals to begin with. And I think, more broadly, I would say that what happens at this point is now the January 6th investigation is really at an inflection point because we've had all of these, major trials and seditious conspiracy trials against these defendants. But remember, like, Gary, there's 1,000 other people, more than 1,000 other people, 2,000 people who could be charged in connection with this. And it's really just a question of how many cases they're going to be able to bring before we ultimately see the end of the statute of limitations, which happens on January 6th of 2026. So, 2.5 more years we've got to bring charges against a lot of these defendants who are still aware, future defendants who are still awaiting charges.
Well, Ryan, I know you've been basically in the courtroom since December on this one, so thank you for that and for your reporting on this. Now, right now, the Biden administration's top immigration official, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, is at the southern border just days before the lifting of pandemic-era restrictions that's expected to create a surge of migrants there. Journalists accompanying Mayorkas were taken to the front lines with Border Patrol officers who are counting, detaining, and then eventually sometimes deporting thousands of migrants daily. Border officials have seen a steady increase in migrants trying to cross the border, with more than 200,000 making an attempt in April alone. Experts say that number could more than double once Title 42 goes away next week. The Biden administration has made this coming surge a big focus in recent weeks, striking a deal with Mexico to return migrants there, sending 1,500 troops to the border, and imposing stricter penalties for illegal crossings, among other moves. NBC's Julia Ainsley is one of those journalists who was following the secretary. She's on the border in Brownsville, Texas today for us. So, Julia, you're in one of the many cities where migrants have been heading in massive numbers down in the Rio Grande Valley. I know you've been speaking to some of them. What does the end of Title 42 mean for these folks? And what do we expect to see change over the next week or two?
Well, at the border, yes, we're expected to see a surge really unlike anything we've seen before. And in fact, those numbers are already going up, Garrett. Just behind me, I've seen probably about 1,000 migrants today, if not more, come across the Rio Grande and be quickly processed by CBP and then taken to a processing center within the U.S. where they'll determine their fate. Under Title 42, many of them could be turned right back into Mexico. But next week, when Title 42 lifts, they'll have a number of different options. And some of the agents that I've spoken to here said even though many of them still won't qualify to stay, the time it will take to process everyone could really slow things down and lead to backlogs, particularly in places like this where you already have so many migrants coming across. I spoke to some of those migrants who've already made the decision to cross this week today when I was out with Border Patrol, and here's what I learned.
Why did you come here? For my life. We've been threatened for some time. It was my last resort. I couldn't live there anymore. I'm from Mexico, from Guadalajara. There's a lot of crime. There's no work now, just a lot of crime.
So you can see it's a lot of desperation. That's always what's driving people. In fact, most of the people I spoke to today haven't even heard of Title 42, but their smugglers have. And they started moving people up in masses, knowing that this Title 42 COVID restriction would be lifting on May 11th. And some of the border officials I spoke to said oftentimes people are misled about what Title 42 means, and the smugglers just start pushing people across so they can move more people, make more money. And unfortunately, a lot of vulnerable people get caught up in the system.
Julia, we talked a lot about some of these steps that the Biden administration has been taking over the last couple of weeks to get ready for this moment. Obviously, you've got the DHS secretary down there now. Congress has planned action on border issues for next week. Talk about just how fraught this political moment is for the Biden administration and how they're trying to get ahead of it.
It's a big moment for them. Immigration, as you know, Garrett, is not something that this administration likes to talk about a lot. They don't see it as a winning issue for them. You can see just behind me, the numbers are growing. There are more migrants walking across. But for Mayorkas, he is coming down here to make this a moment where he wants to explain to the American people what his men and women will be doing to prepare. A lot of it's increasing technology. They have more surveillance. They're actually using AI technology along the border. But they're facing immense criticism, both from Republicans who say they haven't done nearly enough, Also from some Democrats who say maybe they're going too far by sending troops to the border. But now you have some Democrats, including a challenger to Senator Kristen Sinema, Gallego, who said this today, saying that basically he thinks that Title 42 should be extended. And he's one of many who think that perhaps there's a 2-year extension. We're even hearing many more Democrats say it's something they might consider, including Representative Henry Cuellar from Texas. These are things that might be up for consideration. But it's unclear, Garrett, you would know better than I would, whether or not they could get anything done like that in such a short amount of time. They're lifting this May 11th. That's a week from today.
Yeah, I mean, in my day job, I was reporting some of this out today, and getting something passed in that timeline is pretty tough. But there is a growing bipartisan consensus that the administration might need more tools from Congress to handle this surge that's coming. Julia Ainsley, you've been on top of this story for a while now. Thank you for your reporting. We've got new trouble tonight, legal trouble for the NFL, with the attorneys general of New York and California accusing the world's most popular sports league of violating pay equity and anti-discrimination laws. The New York AG, Letitia James, says she will ensure that the NFL is held accountable, and California AG Rob Bonta is following up, saying no company is too big or too popular to avoid being held responsible for its actions. Both of them cite a 2022 New York Times report with more than 30 female ex-employees of the NFL who say they faced gender discrimination and retaliation after filing complaints to the league's HR team. The league calls these allegations entirely inconsistent with its values and its practices, and insisting it does not tolerate any form of discrimination. Kathy Park is following this story for us from LA tonight. So, Kathy, walk us through these allegations that the Times first surfaced and that the AGs are now taking to the next level here.
Yeah, so Garrett, the New York Times article was published last year. As you mentioned, more than 30 former female employees were on the record talking about a culture, a toxic work environment within the NFL. And there were claims, everything that ranged from harassment, discrimination, sexism, ageism, the list goes on. And there was one incident where a woman alleged that a senior executive during the Super Bowl halftime show allegedly pushed her, and that individual, that executive, there were no sort of consequences. He held on to his job. And then another incident, you might remember 2014, the Ray Rice scandal, where the running back, video of him surfaced assaulting his fiance, punching his fiance. And then some people have said, listen, if they have issues within the NFL and they decide to come forward and address these issues with the HR division, then there were things called packaged out situations where they were essentially shown the door when they decided to speak out. So the AGs, these bicoastal AGs in California and New York, are launching this probe, this investigation, to see if there were any sort of employment discrimination laws that were broken. So they'll be looking at all these allegations. The New York Times touched upon a lot of them, but they'll be going back several years as they move forward with this investigation, Garrett.
In the past, the NFL's really tried to keep these things in-house. They run their own investigations. They don't release a lot of information publicly. What's your sense of whether or not they're going to cooperate with this?
Yeah, so the NFL did release a statement earlier today saying that they will fully cooperate with the investigation. They have been subpoenaed, but they also reference a letter that was written by Roger Goodell, signed by him. And he was saying, look, we address a similar inquiry by several AGs last year. And that statement from today reads in part, we outline many of the politics, policies, education programs, and partnerships we've implemented to act on this commitment, and invited the state's attorneys general to meet and discuss our efforts in these areas. We received no further communication from any of the attorneys general before today's announcement. So, Garrett, we should note that this probe is at the corporate level, though. No teams or players have been singled out with this investigation.
But it does fit into a broader pattern that we've seen, at least of allegations made against the team, or leagues and individual teams, right? I mean, the NFL has at least a public perception here that they need to get their house in order.
Yeah, I mean, if you follow the NFL, or even if you don't, you probably have heard similar headlines, the storyline before. It goes back several years. I mean, you're in Washington right now, Garrett. The Washington Commanders obviously have been hit with a harassment scandal, the Ray Rice scandal back in 2014. So one thing after another, and this is something that we seem to be hearing for years, and also more recent allegations as well. So this is all part of a larger investigation as the attorney generals in both of these states, in New York and California, decide to move forward.
I'm a Cowboys fan. We've had our problems down in Texas, too. Kathy Park, thank you for your reporting on this. Now, the man suspected of opening fire in a medical facility, killing one woman, and sending Atlanta into basically a lockdown yesterday is behind bars. He faces murder and aggravated assault charges after passing up his first court appearance just in the last couple of hours. You can see here the moment that police closed in on him, ending a half-day manhunt that spread to the suburbs about 10 miles away near the Braves Stadium. Now, we're learning today that the 24-year-old suspect served in the Coast Guard. He was discharged earlier this year. He used a handgun in this attack, and he was with his mom at this medical facility for an appointment before it all began. We're also learning the name of the woman who was killed, 39-year-old Amy St. Pierre. She worked at the CDC, that agency tweeting out that their hearts are with her family, her friends, and colleagues as they grieve this tragic loss. Blaine Alexander is following this tonight from Atlanta. So, Blaine, police aren't naming a motive if they know one, but you've talked to one of the people who helped track this suspect down. What did you learn?
He was actually hiding out in her apartment complex, Garrett. It's really unbelievable when you hear her story. You know, we talk about the fact that police were able to isolate him to this area about 15 miles away from here where this incident happened. That was impressive in and of itself. But when you listen to her describe just how she was able to really tip police off, she calls it a gut feeling. She says she knows her area, she knows the complex, and down by the pool area, there's a gazebo, there's a pool house, there's a creek. As she described to me, just a lot of different hiding places. She says that she took her dog out for a walk, went up to one of the officers that was kind of monitoring the area and said, hey, you should probably check around here. Not more than a minute later, officers were streaming down there and the guy was taken into custody. Here's how she described that moment. Take a look.
It's unsettling and it's scary, yes. And if they hadn't caught him, I mean, a lot of us walk at night, walk our animals at night. And, we wouldn't have been able to do that if he wasn't apprehended.
She also talked about the fact that this was kind of a close call. I mean, we're talking about somebody who was apprehended just about 100 feet from her house, give or take several hundred feet. And so certainly a very scary moment, but fortunately a safe moment for a lot of people who live there. Garrett.
Yeah, really a wild scene across the whole metro area there in Atlanta the other day. And Blaine, we shouldn't discount the 4 women who were hurt in this shooting. We know their names now: Lisa Glynn, Georgette Whitlow, Jasmine Daniel, and Alessia Hollinger. Are we getting any kind of update on their condition from the hospital tonight?
These are really serious injuries, Garrett. We're talking about 2 women who were shot in the abdomen area, another in the arm, a 4th woman who was shot in the face. So oftentimes, of course, we think about people who survived or who were just injured. But as the medical director there at Grady, the trauma center, said, they have a very long way to go. Take a look.
Physically, they all have a ways to go. I think psychologically and mentally, we have to also remember that, the impact on them and their families. You can't underestimate how traumatic this is, and they have a long way to go.
Traumatic for them, traumatic for their families, but certainly when you talk about the woman who lost her life, you talked about Amy St. Pierre. She's got 2 young kids. She's got a husband, a family. They put out a statement calling her just somebody who was the best of the best and meant so much to their family. So certainly a lot of grief here tonight, Garrett.
Yeah, heartbreaking stuff, especially for her kids. Blaine Alexander, thank you for your reporting on this. And the calls for justice and for criminal charges are getting louder tonight after the New York City medical examiner ruled a homeless man's death on the subway was a homicide. The cause of death was compression of the neck, a chokehold. Mayor Eric Adams today called it a symptom of a mental health crisis in his city.
We cannot have people with severe emotional illnesses on our subway system. You can't have people on the system that need care and ignore them. Others decided to ignore them. I said no to that.
Witnesses say Jordan Neely entered a train car on Monday afternoon and started yelling at passengers, asking them for food, saying he wanted to hurt someone, and saying that he didn't care if he went to jail. Then a bystander put him in the chokehold and took him to the ground. We're going to show you that moment, but just once. And a warning, it is disturbing to watch. Now, you can see Neely on the ground there being restrained in the chokehold, with others holding him down as well. We're told he was held in that position for 15 minutes before the NYPD arrived and began treatment. The 24-year-old man conducting the chokehold there, who some reports say is a former U.S. Marine, was questioned by police and then released without charges. Neely was known to many New York commuters. He was often seen impersonating Michael Jackson and showing off his moves on the city's subway stations. NBC's Rahema Ellis is covering this all for us. And so, Rahema, now that this has been declared a homicide, what happens next in the investigation?
It ramps up this investigation, Garrett, in terms of other authorities besides the NYPD getting involved. And in fact, I want to show you a full screen of what NYPD officials sent to the district attorney's office. It's kind of in legalese, so let me just break it down for you. Essentially, what it's saying is that they believe that now that the medical examiner's office has determined that this is a homicide, it's up to the district attorney's office to take it to the next step. Indeed, that next step is coming also a call from the medical examiner's office itself. Look at this full screen that says, with the cause of death determined as homicide. From the medical examiner, it says, this is not a ruling on intent or culpability, which is for the DA and criminal justice system to consider now. That's what they're doing. NYPD is also now asking for anybody who was on that train at that time to come forward, anyone who has pictures or videos, also to share that with authorities as this investigation now is ramping up. Garrett?
And it seems like there is a ton of video evidence just based on what's been made public already. There's also been a ton of political back and forth on this. We played that bite from the mayor in which it sounds like he's sort of blaming Neely for being in this situation. He also said overnight that there's a lot we don't know about what happened, but added that there were serious mental health issues in play here. AOC Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez kind of clapped back on that, responding that his comments were a new low, in her words, for not being able to clearly condemn what she called a public murder. And understand the governors had to do some cleanup on this issue as well. This has taken on a political character, has it not, Rahema?
Absolutely, it has. I want to share with you something that the governor said yesterday before that determination by the medical examiner was presented about it being a homicide. Full screen of this, the governor says, one element we have not talked about is the $1 billion investment we have in mental health services, so we don't have people who are homeless on our subways, many of them in the throes of a mental health episode. And that's what I believe are some of the factors involved here. So there's consequences for behavior. She was questioned a lot about that statement today. And I want you to listen to what the governor said in response.
I'm really pleased that the district attorney is looking into this matter. As I said, there have to be consequences. And so we'll see how this unfolds. But his family deserves justice. Just looking at that video, you know it's wrong. No one has the right to take the life of another person.
There are a lot of voices being raised right now, Garrett, of some saying that this was wrong, others saying there is time right now for this investigation to begin in earnest. The mayor saying, as you point out, he says there are many layers to what may have happened here. He wants to make certain that every single one of those layers is unraveled so that they can actually get to the truth. Garrett?
A very highly scrutinized investigation just beginning now. Rahema Ellis, thank you for reporting on it for us tonight. And a rough day on Wall Street today, driven by a massive slide for regional banks that could impact your money as fears grow of a broader crisis, after 3 of the largest bank collapses in U.S. history. You see all that red on our board there, the Dow, S&P, NASDAQ, all down. The Dow now negative for the year. One bank getting absolutely slammed tonight is PacWest. We talked about it last night, and you can see it's down more than 50% from just yesterday, 86% from where it started the year. That bank's leadership saying they're pursuing, quote, all options. And it's not the only one. Tonight, Tennessee-based First Horizon is tumbling as well after its merger with TD Bank fell through. Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver joins me now to break some of this down. So, Caleb, these banks struggling on Wall Street has a broader impact, even if you don't keep your money in a small regional bank. Talk about how what we're seeing in these little regional banks is having a broader effect on the economy that affects all of us.
Yeah, we call it contagion in this business, and we've seen the troubles, obviously, with Silicon Valley Bank, First Signature Bank, and, of course, First Republic Bank, now owned by J.P. Morgan. But investors have been looking at the balance sheets of these regional banks and not liking what they see. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates very aggressively for the past 14 months. They did it again yesterday. And when that happens, it really makes what these banks hold on your deposits, the value of those bonds, go down a lot. So investors are looking into the balance sheets, not liking what they see, and they're causing these big sell-offs. Now, the issue is these banks may be healthy. Even in the case of PacWest, they said they hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary in terms of people pulling their money out of the bank, but investors were not convinced of that. That's why the stock got hammered. But it also happened to Western Alliance, to KeyCorp, to Co-America. These are big regional banks that lend a lot of money to families, small businesses, and even large companies in their regions. They're very important to these microeconomies.
You know, what happens if we see further consolidation within the banking industry? These regional banks get gobbled up. I mean, we just saw, who was it last week? First Republic became part of J.P. Morgan. You know, I'm old enough to remember too big to fail being a major issue here, and now it's like too small to survive.
Too small to survive. You're right. So you're seeing the big banks get bigger. And even as amid First Republic's issues, Silicon Valley banks, a lot of those deposits flowed into the bigger banks, the J.P. Morgans of the world, the Citibanks of the world, the Bank of Americas. The issue there is they may have national footprints, but these local regional banks do a lot of personal banking with families, with small businesses. So you have those relationships, and it's very difficult for companies and for families to move from one bank to the next. If your bank gets taken over, you have no choice. But just moving your money around, not so simple for a lot of folks. And a lot of this sell-off is not because there's something necessarily wrong with all of these banks. It's just that smell of fear that's in the air right now that's driving investors to sell shares in these regional banks, and that could expedite a potential recession, another crisis in liquidity where there's no lending between banks or between consumers and banks. We want to watch that very carefully.
That word you used at the top, contagion, scary stuff for legislators, for regulators, for everybody who's watching this space. Caleb Silver, thanks for being on top of it for us tonight. And also tonight, Vice President Harris and other White House officials met with CEOs from major companies building artificial intelligence products to discuss the potential risks of that technology. Before the meeting, the White House released a list of actions that they're taking to protect Americans' rights and safety as AI technology advances. That list included a $140 million investment in AI research and development, a public assessment of existing generative AI systems, and policy guidance on the use of AI systems by the U.S. government. President Biden stopped by the meeting, and a White House official says he's been briefed extensively on ChatGPT. He's even experimented with it himself. I want to bring in Tom Costello, who covers these issues for us tonight. And Tom, AI is obviously clearly becoming ingrained in our society. Is the government already behind the eight ball here in terms of regulation or something like control?
I think so. And listen, I don't think it's just this government. I think the entire country is behind in terms of realizing where AI is going, where it is now, and the potential promise and peril that is associated with AI. Take a look at what the vice president said today. She's the one who convened the meeting at the White House, bringing together 4 high-tech CEOs. AI has the potential to dramatically increase threats to safety and security, infringe on civil rights and privacy, and erode public trust and faith in the democracy. Now, listen, it's true. AI has also been responsible for great scientific breakthroughs, for diagnosing cancer, for going ahead and creating new medicines, writing books, writing music, writing poems. But that's all artificial intelligence. And the concern is it could be used for good and bad, and the bad could be very bad.
Well, let's talk about that, because I've sort of had a hard time wrapping my mind around how big of a threat AI really is. It sounds like science fiction, but you talked to someone today who's very familiar with the capabilities for this to potentially become a negative force on our society.
That's right. I talked to a professor from the University of Toronto. He is known as the godfather of AI because he's one of the very first who's been pioneering AI for the better part of his 50-year career. He has just now left Google because he's trying to sound the alarm about artificial intelligence, and he believes, again, he spearheaded AI, he believes it is now a threat to humanity. Listen to what he said. Do you believe that artificial intelligence, as it grows at this pace, poses an existential threat to humans?
Yes, I think it's possible. I mean, we'll try and avoid this, but I think it's possible that people are just passing phase in the evolution of intelligence.
People are a passing phase. In other words, computers will take over.
Yes, that's possible.
Well, that is stark. That is very stark. And picture, I mean, I don't know how old you are out there, but picture, 2001 Space Odyssey, when Hal, the computer, would not let Dave back into the spaceship. That is the fear right now, that AI is developing so fast, the cat's out of the bag, and trying to throw up any regulatory guardrails may be simply at this point too late.
So, Tom, if it's AI's planet, we're all just living on it. I mean, does that mean we're essentially looking to the creators of these software programs, to the Googles and Microsofts of the world, to be the most responsible actor in this space now?
Yeah, voila, you just nailed it. That's exactly what they hope. They hope that the producers, the companies will be responsible and put up their own guardrails. But is that going to prevent the Chinese from putting up guardrails, or Russia or India or Brazil? I mean, the concern is, in the history of humans, we have rarely been able to contain ourselves, whether it's nuclear weapons, any weapon at all, a pandemic. I mean, the concern is that this is about to get out of control. And Dr. Hinton said this isn't a 20-year problem. It's going to happen within 5 years.
Wow. All right. Well, that's fascinating stuff, Tom. Thank you for bringing it to us, and we'll look for your report on NBC Nightly News tonight. And coming up, new research is identifying the earliest signs of colon cancer, why experts say it's a, quote, alarming problem for young adults. Plus, another big retailer is reportedly getting ready to file for bankruptcy. That's coming up in our 5 Things. Stay with us. There are some new inductees tonight to the Video Game Hall of Fame. We'll play with that story in a bit, but coming up, the 5 Things. But first, Ed Sheeran today celebrating a jury's decision to protect what he calls the creative process of songwriters after the pop star was found not liable in a copyright infringement lawsuit. Listen to him outside court after his decision.
It's devastating to be accused of stealing someone else's song when we've put so much work into our livelihoods. I'm just a guy with a guitar who loves writing music for people to enjoy. I am not and will never allow myself to be a piggy bank for anyone to shake.
This trial stemming from a lawsuit from the heirs of Ed Townsend, who co-wrote Let's Get It On with Marvin Gaye. They claim Sheeran copied Townsend's work when he wrote his hit song, Thinking Out Loud. Listen to them both.
23, and I'm thinking about how. And if you feel like I feel, baby, then come on.
In a statement, the attorney representing the Townsend family said they respect the jury's decision, but they will be appealing its verdict. Danny Ceballos joins me now. So, Danny, we played those songs here. Obviously, the case is much more technical than just listening to it by ear. But as somebody who watched this more closely, where did the Townsend case fall through?
Because they're not identical when you look at the sheet music, and that's what counts. Not
it's
what
as simple
it
as
feels
that.
like. Not like what it feels like in your brain when you listen to both of those together. It's about what is in the sheet music, and there are differences. It's in a slightly different key. The songs are about one half step between each other, so really close. And in the 4-chord progression that is the focus of this case, the second of 4 chords is really not the same chord. It's an analog. It's close. It's similar, but it is not the same chord. And I imagine, although you can expect that was a powerful point for the defense to make, is that how can these be so similar to be almost identical if only 3 out of 4 chords are even the same?
I feel like you're a guitar guy, Danny. That was very smooth, the way you broke that down. We've seen lawsuits like this before, obviously. Stars like Taylor Swift, Led Zeppelin, Vanilla Ice. I doubt this will be the last case like this we see. Sheeran said that if the jury had decided the other way, we quote in his words, might as well say goodbye to the creative freedom of songwriters. What does this case mean more broadly for the future of legal fights like these when they undoubtedly happen again in the music industry?
Look, I am a student of these cases. I love them. Everything. I mean, the holy grail of these cases is George Harrison's "My Sweet Lord" and Chiffon's "He's So Fine." Check it out on YouTube. It's amazing. And, you know, look, what I've learned is one immutable rule. When you play these songs for different people, people are all over the place on whether they think they're the same. And they have different criteria for what they think is similarity. And so for that reason, I don't think any of these cases are truly precedential. They are, in the words of one Supreme Court justice on a totally different topic, you know it when you see it. And then even when you see it, I promise you, your closest friend will completely disagree with you on whether or not they are alike. My wife and I bitterly disagreed on whether these two songs were similar. And for her, once she learned that the second chord was a D over F sharp versus an F sharp minor, she was out. She was done. They're not the same.
It's fascinating stuff. It feels like the kind of thing you could debate at the bar for hours if you were so inclined. Danny Ceballos, thank you for breaking this down for us. I want to get you over to our 5 things now. These are 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, police in California say they've arrested a former UC Davis student suspected in 3 recent stabbings near campus. 2 people died in those stabbings and another was hurt. Police say the suspect had a large knife in his backpack when he was taken into custody. Number 2, the Florida legislature passed a bill today banning transgender people from using public restrooms that align with their gender identity. The Safety in Public Spaces Act makes that a second-degree misdemeanor. State Republicans also passed a bill targeting diversity programs in colleges. Number 3, colon cancer is now on the rise among young adults, and new research has identified the earliest possible symptoms you should be watching out for. Scientists say abdominal pain, blood in your stool, ongoing diarrhea, or an iron deficiency could be a sign to go see your doctor. Number 4, the Wall Street Journal reports that discount home goods chain Christmas Tree Shops is preparing to file for bankruptcy, perhaps as soon as this weekend. The store spun off from Bed Bath & Beyond in 2020 and has something like 80 locations. And number 5, the Video Game Hall of Fame is out with its 2023 inductees today. The Last of Us leads the crop, landing a spot on the heels of its big HBO TV adaptation. And then there's the popular Wii Sports program, which has been across generations, as well as Barbie Fashion Designer. You see there, the first game marketed directly to girls. I need to play Last of Us. I need to do it. When we come back, a bunch of Republican senators are demanding answers from the Navy, what it has to do with recruitment strategy and drag. That's next. We have new details tonight about a U.S. visit to imprisoned American Paul Whelan in Russia. That's coming up later in the Global. But first, today, several Republican senators are asking for answers from the Navy on a digital ambassador program involving a drag queen meant to help recruitment. Their letter cites concerns of, quote, the promotion of a banned app, referring to TikTok, and behavior they say many deem as inappropriate in a professional workplace. This is all centered around Navy sailor Joshua Kelly, who performs in drag and goes by the stage name Harpy Daniels. Daniels was selected as one of the Navy's digital ambassadors back in November of last year, according to this TikTok post on Daniels' account that you're watching here. A Navy spokesperson said the program was designed to explore the digital environment to reach a wide range of potential candidates as the Navy navigates its most challenging recruiting environment it has faced. They added that the program has ended and they are evaluating how it will exist in the future. I want to bring in Aaron Gilchrist now, who's been digging into this story for us. So, Aaron, we now have these Republican senators really coming at the Navy for this. Drag has obviously become a hot-button cultural issue lately. Unpack this whole controversy for us.
So we should say first that the armed forces in general in this country have been dealing with challenges around recruitment for several years now. That's been the case across many branches. And one of the issues is just a lack of interest. We looked at a survey that the Ronald Reagan Institute did at the end of last year, and the question was posed, how willing are people to join the U.S. military? And only 13% of people who responded to this survey said that they were willing to join the military. And so something like that kind of fuels the idea that they need to start thinking outside the box. The Navy stood up this digital ambassador program, pilot program, really, to try to test out one way to reach people where they are. We know that social media influencers are in high demand these days because that's where people are. On social media, that's where they can get to that key demographic. So Joshua Kelly is was one of 5 ambassadors in this digital program. And the idea was that you have Kelly, who's a sailor and a drag queen, goes by Harpy Daniels, as you said, who has this big following on these social media platforms. We looked at Twitter, we looked at Instagram, we looked at TikTok. And Kelly's been using TikTok and Instagram to share about experiences in the Navy, to talk about performances as a drag queen as well. We have this group of senators now this week who sent this letter to the Secretary of the Navy saying, we want to know more about this ambassador program, that it should not be promoting the use of a banned app like TikTok in this case on a personal service member's device, on a personal device of a service member. But the letter went on to say, and you can see it here, does the Navy endorse drag shows? Would the Navy enlist burlesque or exotic dancers to reach possible recruits? Sort of making this point that on one side, we can look at this and say, all right, they're questioning the use of TikTok. On the other side, there seems to be a cultural, social question that's being raised by this letter here. And these senators going on to say that they've presented several questions to the secretary that they want answers to around this pilot program. The Navy hasn't said yet, hasn't responded to us yet about whether they've actually received that letter from the senators.
I'll be very curious to see how the Navy chooses to engage with lawmakers on this who control their funding.
Right.
But this started in November of last year. Why is this program getting so much attention now? I mean, does that speak to the effectiveness of drawing attention to this issue?
It may be a little bit of that, but also this is when a lot of conservative platforms have picked up this story, if you will. Obviously, we know that the pilot program started in October, ended in March of this year, but it's just sort of getting this traction on social media and in these conservative spaces. There was one candidate for Congress who was opposed to the idea of recruitment through these sorts of means with these types of tactics on social media and tweeted that the military is woke and is going to become more woke as a result of using campaigns like this. And that's the reason that they're having recruitment problems, according to this one particular voice. And so we'll see how this all shakes out. The Navy says that it's examining this pilot program to see how it worked, if it worked, and whether it'll come back in the future.
It's a fascinating issue. Thank you for breaking down on that reporting for us today, Aaron Gilchrist. All right, coming up, it could soon be a lot harder for people to get their hands on some of those really popular weight loss drugs we've been talking about on this broadcast. We'll explain why next. Plus, a real-life snakes on a plane just happened in India. That's later in the Global. You won't want to miss that. Novo Nordisk, that's the company that makes that really popular weight loss drug Wegovy we've been talking about, is saying today that it's going to temporarily cut some of the U.S. supply of the drug to help keep up with soaring demand. The CFO telling CNBC this is about safeguarding continuity of care for patients. There has been a giant demand for drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic recently. Nearly 5 million people were prescribed drugs in that same class as Ozempic in February of this year. That's 3 million more than were prescribed them just 2 years ago. And that demand isn't going to slow down anytime soon. Just yesterday, we told you about states that have to crack down on pharmacies producing copycat versions of these very same drugs. And now Barclays says the obesity drug industry could be worth as much as $200 billion within the next decade. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joins me now. Demand is surging here. Clearly, the company's scrambling to keep up. But now they're cutting specifically starter dose supplies. What does that mean for the people with diabetes who were actually supposed to be the people taking this medication in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Garrett, you know, as you mentioned in the lead, we have been dealing with these shortages of both Ozempic and Wegovy for some time now. It's really, a mismatch of supply and demand. And just so that our viewers are reminded again that Ozempic and Wegovy are the same medication, semaglutide. Ozempic is indicated only for type 2 diabetes, and Wegovy is specifically for overweight or obesity. And the issue really comes down to, again, that there's been such an increased demand for these medications that what Novo Nordisk is really saying is, listen, we have to cut down on the supply of these starter doses so that the individuals who are taking it can continue to take it consistently, because you don't want to have treatment like this interrupted.
So does it fall to doctors then to be kind of the triage here on the front lines, determining who's a candidate for starting these drugs because they need it for their diabetes control or because they want it for weight loss?
Well, again, there are very strict indications, Garrett, for what these drugs are and who they are indicated for. Ozempic, as I mentioned, is for type 2 diabetes. For Wegovy, you are a candidate for the medicine if you are obese or if you are overweight and have other conditions, comorbidities that would place you at an increased risk for cardiovascular disease, such as hypertension, high cholesterol, or type 2 diabetes. And those are very strict criteria. We know that people are taking it to lose 5 or 10 pounds who are not necessarily overweight and who don't have those underlying risk factors for cardiovascular disease. That is not who these medications were ever intended for.
It's interesting, but it does feel like such a wide universe of people, and there you have the problem with supply versus demand. Dr. Azar, we could probably talk about this all day. These drugs are fascinating to us, but thank you for your analysis on this.
You bet.
Tonight, the State Department is saying they're still not able to confirm unsubstantiated accusations from Russia of an alleged attempt to assassinate Vladimir Putin. What they say they can confirm is that the U.S. played no role whatsoever in what happened. You'll remember just 24 hours ago, we told you on this show how Russia was blaming Ukraine for this alleged drone attack that you're seeing here on your screen. Ukraine denies being involved in it. And now the Kremlin is saying decisions on the level of, quote, terrorist attacks are not made in Kyiv, but in Washington, and that Ukraine only does what it's told to do. And it's important to note that Russia hasn't provided any actual evidence of this alleged attack. While we're overseas, let's dive into our global segment, which also starts with news out of Russia tonight. The U.S. ambassador to that country visited retired Marine Paul Whelan in prison today. He's been detained there for more than 4 years and is serving a 16-year sentence for spying. U.S. officials say he's wrongfully detained, and this afternoon, we got a rare bipartisan statement from House leaders. They're calling on Russia to immediately release Whelan and Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who was detained there in March. From India, snakes apparently on a plane. Indian customs officials posted this video to Twitter saying they found 22 snakes and a chameleon inside a woman's checked luggage after arriving from Malaysia. Afterwards, great. Officials took the reptiles. No word on whether the woman was also taken into custody or arrested. In Mexico, the army got a new rescue puppy from Turkey. Earlier this year, one of Mexico's search dogs died while looking for survivors in the devastating earthquake in that country. This 3-month-old German Shepherd is named Friend in Turkish, and he is adorable. Still to come, Michelle Obama is co-founding a new company, how she's trying to get kids to eat healthier after the break. Michelle Obama now announcing that she's co-founded a company making healthier food and drinks for kids, products that she says have less sugar and higher nutrition.
I've learned that on this issue, if you want to change the game, you can't just work from the outside. You got to get inside. You've got to find ways to change the food and beverage industry itself.
The former First Lady's work with the company called Plessy Nutrition is an extension of her White House initiative to improve child nutrition. Childhood obesity is unfortunately still quite prevalent in the U.S., affecting about 20% of all kids from the ages of 2 to 19, according to the CDC. Sugary drinks are children's main source of added sugar. Ms. Obama said as 2/3 of them have at least one drink every day. The new company will also contribute 10% of its profits to causes working to improve childhood nutrition. Dr. Kavita Patel joins me now to break this down. And Doc, these products can apparently be found in Target, in Sprouts, and in Walmart stores across the country. The big issue here is, to me, is access to healthy foods for kids in the U.S. So my question to you is, does that kind of thing help reach the kids who really need it?
Yeah, Garrett, certainly it's a good start because those are big box retail stores that tend to be in many communities. But I think it's even more dire than that. We need to get it out of those stores and into corner stores where we find that in neighborhoods, many families do most of their grocery shopping, especially in these food deserts, communities where there really are just very few good resources for foods. And that's why we see such a large consumption of high sugar, high salt, and some of the foods and drinks that we shouldn't be giving to ourselves and our families. But I think that's I imagine, is something that this company will tackle as they grow.
Now, the former First Lady said she's a co-founder and a strategic partner and that she plans to mostly work behind the scenes here. But how important is it to have someone like Mrs. Obama attached to this? I mean, we spent most of the last couple of years talking about public health messaging. So how does having a former First Lady motivate kids and parents differently than having your pediatrician make the same, recommendations?
Yeah, look, I think we've all learned the phrase trusted messengers really does mean something. And Mrs. Obama, the First Lady, has been a trusted messenger. When she started her Let's Move campaign, I was in the White House, and I can tell you she made more of a difference than probably I had in years of trying to talk to people about healthy habits and diets. And a lot of it, Garrett, is because of her own family story. The reason she started down this journey is because she was told her own children, her own daughter, in fact, had a problem with childhood obesity. And it just kind of struck her. If someone of my resources can, how does anybody do it? So I think it's going to go a long way. But again, as we pointed out, it's not enough. And hopefully private and public partnerships in conjunction with this company can try to take, a crack in what I think is not just a crisis in the United States, but a global crisis.
Dr. Patel, for the record, I consider you a trusted messenger. And in about the 45 seconds or so that we have left, what message would you give parents to help really steer clear of certain products or issues if they're trying to tackle this?
Start small. Do some simple swaps. Don't try to do everything in one fell swoop because you'll be certain to set yourself up for failure. So little things like one soda substituted for even half a soda, that will go a long way in your child's life diet.
All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you so much. And that's a wrap for this hour and for the one before it. If you missed any of it, you can catch up on the latest reporting and newest interviews from our team. You can find us at any time in so many places, including Peacock, Roku, Pluto TV, Tubi, Hulu, our NBC News YouTube channel. Just search Hallie Jackson now. You'll find us there. Top Story picks up our coverage after this.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.